Hello and welcome to the Overly Animated Podcast, where we take animation seriously. We provide fan-oriented and analytic discussions on a variety of animated shows, movies, and anime, including Steven Universe and Gravity Falls. I'm Dylan Hysen, and today I'm joined by Mel Moyer.
Hello.
Today, Mel and I are going to continue our Pixar rewatch series. Today we're talking The Incredibles, the 2004, I believe, Brad Bird film. Mel and I have done these retrospective podcasts on a few of them now, and if you search for Pixar on overlyanimated.com, you can find all the ones I tagged as that. And eventually we're just going to go through them all and kind of talk about how our views on these films have changed over the years. Like I said, overlyanimated.com. You can support our Patreon at patreon.com/overlyanimated. But yeah, let's get into The Incredibles. Mel and I previously talked about Brad Bird's subsequent film, Ratatouille, the 2007 film, this one earlier than that. I think we're getting into the kind of range of Pixar films now that were really like present in our childhoods, like right around this time. So it's going to be interesting to see our views on them now. We both rewatched this film, and now we'll get into it. So Mel, What do you think of The Incredibles on this rewatch? What did you originally think of it, and how have your views changed on it through time?
I loved The Incredibles. That was amongst the films that I used to watch on a weekly basis. This is the first time I've watched it in about a year, though. And I know that for facts because I made my mom watch it for the first time a year ago. She doesn't watch movies. She was late in the game. I still really, really like it. However, going into it, watching it, knowing that I have the podcast does kind of color, I guess, rewatching it and kind of looking at certain things. And I guess I kind of have a similar sort of moral conundrum that you had with Ratatouille, where I'm I really, really like this movie, but, it is, and we talked about it a little bit before this, that it is a little bit sort of very male-centric and male-oriented, and even with these great female characters, they don't get a lot to do, and they're kind of relegated into very stereotypical female roles. So that's something.
How about quality-wise?
Quality-wise,
yeah.
I watched it on my really nice new computer on my Blu-ray, so it looked really nice animation-wise. Music's still awesome, animation's still awesome, voice acting's still good. So from a quality, just sitting down watching it for entertainment-wise, still love it a ton. Thinking about it now, discrepancies in my mind.
Interesting. I've certainly biased how you went into this film. So background on this, Mel and I got into some serious kind of discussions on WALL-E and Ratatouille in terms of feminism and heteronormativity in those movies, and how you merge your views on liking a film a lot, but it also not being super progressive. It's something I'm finding myself with Gravity Falls now too. Another one that's not super progressive, but none of these films are inherently problematic. I would say they're just not up to the standards of what you would like a film to be now. But of course, this was 2004. I was never as high on The Incredibles as everyone else. My favorite ones were always WALL-E. Ratatouille came out after this. Certainly I watched it probably in theaters. We were very young, and I haven't rewatched it maybe for over 5 years. I still remembered what happened, which is interesting, but it's been a while, and today rewatching it, I was kind of blown away by it. I didn't remember I didn't know how good it was. Anyway,
that was a shock. It's a plot twist.
It's really good. Yeah, this film is kind of has everything going for it, and it's almost perfect.
Wow.
Yeah. So I didn't expect to hold that view, but it's just so good. The thing that's interesting about this one, talking about these merging things in your mind on our socially progressive views, but have these inherently heteronormative films. This is the heteronormative film. This film is made to be heteronormative. The entire movie is based around this concept of a nuclear family. So does this make it better or worse for it in terms of it being problematic? I don't know. It's trying to be what we might find problematic about it, which is interesting. So I guess I'll start off with discussion there. I'll read this quote, if I can find it, from Wikipedia, of course, but it's talking about how Brad Bird designs the superpowers for the entire family to be based around the typical expected role of the member of the family. Brad Bird says, the dad is always expected in the family to be strong, so I made him strong. The moms are always pulled in a million different directions, so I made her stretch like taffy. Teenagers, particularly teenage girls, are insecure and defensive, so I made her turn invisible and turn on shields. And 10-year-old boys are hyperactive energy balls. Babies are unrealized potential. So, basically, Brad Bird's designed the entire concept of the film around a typical American nuclear family.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting. And it's like on one hand, okay, so the fact that this is what the movie about makes sense, right? It's not just coincidentally upholding societal expectations. It's purposefully doing them within the concept of the film. On the other hand, it's just because that was the concept, it still doesn't mean that what happens in the movie is not what happens. It doesn't necessarily excuse any problematic things. But that being said, nothing is really inherently problematic. It's just all stereotypical, which is the point. So it's kind of hard to. I'm having trouble understanding what we should take away from this.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of in a similar vein of Ratatouille, where I feel like it's just passively problematic, not because it's inherently doing anything wrong, just because it's just not doing anything. It is kind of interesting the way he phrased that he did that based on expected roles.
Yeah.
That I'm kind of not sure. I'm neutral on that statement.
Well, it's not. It's like he's conscious of what he's doing. So the difference for me between this and Ratatouille doesn't need to have a male gendered rat and a male main human character. This film does need to have the dad as the lead, kind of. I mean, it could have focused on the mom, too, but if you're going based on societal expectations, then it needs to be the way it is. Mm-hmm. Ratatouille, there's no reason. So I think that's the difference.
Yeah.
The only thing in Ratatouille is we discussed how the kitchen is very male-dominated and how that is based on expectations. So that maybe is more of a direct analog.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can get into this more as we go. Just in terms of quality of the film, it's pretty...
The writing is so good.
It's pretty flawless. Yeah, I'm used to always finding problems in scripts, but and so when... the biggest thing, I don't know, maybe I have a very story, narrative-centric outlook on a lot of films and stuff, and certainly you do too, but I always just find... it's always very easy to find problematic lines and directions that the story goes in, especially if you're looking for it. Here, though, I didn't think about that the entire movie. I was just into it. Yeah, and that's just a lot of credit to Brad Bird's script here.
Yeah, no, and that was one thing. Watching it again, I was like, wow, this is just the thing with syndrome and So yeah, I mean that's a thing I look for a lot when watching movies. Is I like to pay attention. I mean, obviously you pay attention to the writing passively because plot, what's good, what's not. But just the way it was crafted here with Buddy and Syndrome and Mirage, even just the good writing on that as a awesome secondary character. It was the way things played out was just so well crafted.
Yeah. Who's the awesome secondary character? Mirage?
Yeah. I like her because, and this is obviously she's barely a character, but I feel in terms of secondary characters that you get a lot of the time, she stands out to me more in the realm of secondary Pixar characters. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, she's not a bad secondary character. My thing with her is that she's basically what you said, just not really a character, right?
Yeah, she's not really a character, but rules of the Sid Field rules of character writing is characteristics are aspects a character is made of choices. Not obviously she's not a character, but I enjoy her from the sort of aspect standpoint.
Yeah. The thing about Mirage that I like, there's one thing I hate about, I mean, I don't know why we're starting with Mirage in terms of specifics, but we can get into her. There's one thing I hate about her and one thing I love about her. What the hate is her function as a seductress towards Mr. Incredible Bob.
Mr. Incredible.
Yeah, Mr. Incredible / Bob. Looking at the Wikipedia list of characters, so reading both there. Yeah, I don't know how much I like that. And then, not necessarily her in terms of her problems with it. It's not like she does anything wrong or anything, but just in terms of how we're supposed to see Bob still as sympathetic through that. It's like, I don't know, but that Bob loses some sympatheticness towards me when that's happening, even though he's not like cheating or anything. It's he's obviously drawn in and disillusioned with his wife in the beginning to a certain extent. So I don't know that I feel like that part's real, but it's not appealing. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
The thing I do like about her is she's the type of character in a narrative which I find very refreshing and realistic, because you have this villain who we can accept him as being just this weird evil guy. There's not a lot of backstory with him, but there's maybe enough for us to accept what he's doing. But that doesn't mean that everyone around him is going to also be just illogically evil and not care about basic like humanity. So I like characters like her functioning within these super like villain plots as like maintaining their humanity throughout these like through these terrible people around them. She just felt real to me with that, even though of course why is she selectively caring about children when like tons of superheroes he's been killing superheroes off, you know.
I feel like that's a common trope though that people pull in movies, is that you kind of use the kids as a living prop at that point, where they're like, oh, I don't care about the 15 adult humans I killed, but that kid tripped, so it's a very easy trope, I think, to make someone try and force a sympathetic view on like a villainous character.
Yeah, and I think it worked here. Although if you like try to get into it too much, it's like, why is she selective in her morality?
You could make the argument there's an element of sort of unintentional sexism there, that it's a woman caring about kids.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I agree, but I also think that I mean, personally, I would like if there's a male character too. It's basically the same things happening. Like in terms of why are they caring about the kids as opposed to. I also think it's interesting if you start to look into that sense of morality from her. Like, did she get a sense from Syndrome that the supers are like not humans, right? Mm-hmm. Is that how she justified it in her mind, working for him? Also, what's their relationship too? Is she? Are they?
No, I had questions.
There's only one scene like that suggests that they're lovers of some capacity, but the rest it could just be assistant too. So that's an interesting.
She's like the Delphine of this Orphan Black.
I do not understand.
Someone out there will understand.
Okay, let's back up a little bit. A lot of people call The Incredibles the greatest superhero movie ever made.
They also say that about Spider-Man 2, so let's...
Who says that about Spider-Man?
A lot of people say that about Spider-Man 2. Look up the reviews on Spider-Man 2. It's like weirdly, ridiculously acclaimed.
What even happens in Spider-Man 2?
Doc Ock. And like...
I don't remember.
Okay.
Stuff. It's either like this or The Dark Knight, I think, is the most common refrain here. But but to me, watching this, this is to me more of a spy movie than a superhero movie. That's the weird part. It
does have a very like 1970s kind of spy feel to it.
If you read the Wikipedia article, Brad Bird's all about calling this a 60s spy movie. In his analysis of it.
Yeah.
It's a weird merging that really works somehow.
Yeah, well, and that was my thing with the music, too, is the music is very sort of espionage sounding more so than it is, like, the theme from Superman or something. And it does operate, I think, in that, like, it's interesting because I feel like if you look at it, it's like, okay, at the beginning you see all the supers. I feel like that was sort of the heyday of, like, the Superman-style superhero, and now what we're looking at here is kind of a more espionage because, they're living in secret, like basically have their own witness protection program thing. So I could see that, as the tone making a lot of sense. But it just works really well.
Yeah, it kind of merges, from superhero to spy, and the soundtrack is intentionally 60s spy movie based, and it's really good. Also, side note, I think this movie is interesting in terms of the witness protection program thing, it's like interesting in the context of current films because Civil War is coming out the next year or something.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lot about how the government's dealing with superheroes, right? And this film has a lot of elements like that too. So I think it's going to be interesting in that context. And the sequel for this film might come out sometime. It's not going to be before Civil War,
in
but
development.
we will talk about the potential sequel towards the end. Yeah. You brought up the beginning. The beginning is, I didn't remember. The beginning is stunning to this movie. The first 15, 20 minutes before they cut to the current, it's so good.
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, it's like even better than the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Which is pretty. It just so seamlessly moves between things that Mr. Incredible is doing, like before the wedding, and it's so seamlessly building all this backstory for the presents and unraveling the narrative, and it's just very appealing and very well done. I don't know. I didn't remember. Like, I always think of Pixar movies of having better beginnings than ends, but I always think of Up and WALL-E. I didn't even remember that this one also falls in that category.
Yeah, no, I think it's just a staple of this kind of film's writing style, because we didn't see it in Ratatouille, that I'm trying to come up with a word for it, because, like, sort of twisting is not what's happening. There's only, like, one major plot twist. It's almost a very complicated plot, particularly for an animated film. Like, I think it's got a lot packed into it, and even in those first, like, I guess it's about 10 minutes long, those first 10 minutes, it's like they've packed a bunch of exposition, a bunch of character introductions and world building so seamlessly well into 10 minutes, and then it just continues throughout the movie. And that's very much top-down writing, but it's very, very well done.
Yeah. Okay, so this is going to be off topic a little bit, but you're the perfect person to talk about this with. So, what was that?
I said, hey-o.
Oh, yeah. So, I want to build on this beginning's better than the end thing. So, Up is the best example of this, right?
Yeah.
But also WALL-E has it. So, I think WALL-E's kind of what I want to focus in on. It's kind of how the concept to the film is really well established in the beginning, and then when you need to apply a narrative arc to it, it kind of stumbles. Like, the narrative arc doesn't hold up to the concept. I want to bring up a lot of movies here. I want to bring up this one because it starts really strong, incredibly strong concept, and if there's a weak point to this movie, it's once they're running around the island. So that's kind of where the narrative arc is coming in. Would you agree that if there's like a down point to it?
Yeah.
It's just like when they're all separated, that kind of is it's kind of a long
Which
sequence.
that falls in the typical area where that sort of like lull happens in films in the 60 minutes between the first 30 minutes and the last like 10.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Another one that jumps out at me is Frozen. A film we'll definitely discuss here. Mel's very passionate about. But Frozen, incredible in the beginning, also has a great first 10-minute sequence. Personally, I love the Build a Snowman, just how that functions within the movie. It's just so great. And then once they embark, specifically...
Once they're adults, I don't care.
Yeah, no, it's like once it's Elsa and
Kristoff.
Once they're on their little buddy get back to the typical get back to this place. Once they're on their journey to do that, then that's certainly the movie's weak point, and it's like, who even cares? So there's the trend. I don't know, maybe there's others that you have the beginning established concept of the movie and you establish it really well, but then when you go on a narrative arc, you don't do well. That being said, there's an opposite too. There's a lot of movies that struggle with exposition, but once they get into it, they're really good. And the one that jumps out to me is Inception, which is one of my favorite films of all time. So I don't really have these complaints. But a lot of people say this movie is way too exposition based. There's like 30 minutes before we get into any action in it. But then once it gets there and once they're going through all the different levels of reality, then it's really incredible. So, like, I guess how would you explain this difference from any sort of narrative, professional narrative perspective? And, like, what do you think do you agree with me? And, like, what do you think I'm talking about technically?
So what's technically what you're talking about is what's known as, like, there's varying degrees of how long it takes, but there's this thing called the 30-minute plot point, where the first 30 minutes of your film is you're building the world, you're building the character, you're introducing the audience to all of this. And obviously, like, something like the opening scene of The Incredibles isn't going to take 30 minutes, like that opening 10-minute sequence. That's not what you're doing. It's just you're building the beginning of the narrative arc. Once you hit this sort of 30-minute plot point, that's when you sort of jettison your character into much faster paced narrative flow. So, example in here, the 30-minute plot point is when he chooses to accept the first message from Mirage. Because what ends up happening here is then you've got your character makes a decision that the technical definition of it is that they make a decision that permanently changes the state of their world, and there's no going back. And then you move into the second act of a film. So I think it's sort of the tension between establishing concept and then starting narrative, because those two aren't always the same thing, and a lot of times they're not. Is that you sit down and you got this idea, but you've got no narrative arc for it, and then that comes in later. I think that's what happened a lot with WALL-E, because what happens there, and obviously this isn't always 30 minutes because you got a 90-minute film, you're compressing this, but that's just what it's called. So 30-minute plot point in WALL-E, he jumps on the rocket with Eve, and then the narrative begins. So it's just a disconnect in certain films between opening, establishing concept and world, and then the beginning of the narrative.
Yeah, well, WALL-E's the perfect example for this. Like, it really has the first 30-minute concept, and then it gets into the narrative arc. Like, so why another example to bring up is Inside Out. I think the recent film. That's another one that goes on. I think it's just the exact same plot as Frozen. They need to get back to the certain thing once you get into that, but it takes a while to get there. It is probably 30 minutes, and the beginning 30 minutes are probably better than their little journey back to the headquarters. So it's like, why are so many of these films struggling to introduce an interesting narrative? I think that's the question.
I mean, I guess that's just the nature of the beast. The thing about screenwriting is that it's a super duper confined writing medium, as opposed to something like books or short stories, and even more so than television, it's just super duper strict to write a screenplay, because you have a formula that you have to follow. Like, you can map this out in every single movie. There's the insight, there's the opening, there's a 30-minute plot point, there's 60 minutes at least of rising action. At 90 minutes, give or take, you will find your characters at the lowest point they could possibly hit, and then the climax happens, and then the falling action. That's every single movie, and if they don't do that, then they generally aren't very good movies. But I think it's just the nature of the beast, thinking to yourself, oh, I have this really good idea about a movie about a robot that's the last, sort of moving, quote unquote, living thing on Earth, and then being like, okay, how do I turn that into a movie? I think it's just people doing concepts before they've got sort of these characters defined. And in a perfect scenario, your characters are the ones driving these plot points instead of the plot points sort of happening to them and them reacting.
Yeah.
So it's a thing.
Do you think that this is, so what's the problem here, I guess, is my question. So is it the traditional way in which where people are expected to write screenplays? You kind of, I feel like your answer to that is going to be no, because you said that if you don't do that, then it's not going to be a very good film.
No.
So I feel like you don't think that's the problem. But there's another, but then you got into it at the end. Or so is it that, or is it people writing concepts rather than like character journeys and characters?
I think it's more. I mean, I'm not convinced that the formula writing process is perfect either. I think it works really well, and it obeys sort of the 3-structure arc and that sort of thing. But at the same time, I do think it's honestly just a lot of people doing concepts without following through on it. And that's like, everyone does it, because you're more likely to think, wow, what if I was writing a story about insert concept here, instead of saying, oh, I had this idea about a character, like what kind, and then doing it that way. So it's just, and it's all, the thing about films is that they're more likely to be genre-based than character-based than books. I mean, books, for the most part, unless you're getting into sort of like YA dystopian, they're very, very character-centric and character-driven. Films, most of the time, especially with something like The Incredibles and Pixar films, most of the time it's things happening at characters, because it's adhering to genre standards, which isn't inherently bad, but at the same time it can yield kind of frustrating responses when narratives don't meet sort of promised concepts at the beginning.
So let's compare this movie to WALL-E. Now, I think WALL-E actually is a better film than this. Like, personally, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. But narratively, like, this movie is more seamless than WALL-E for sure. But this film and WALL-E both have like a concept establishment point. WALL-E's is longer than this one's, but the difference I think is WALL-E is like, okay, it's concept, and then there's the plot on the ship, which didn't exist before. This film, I think, kind of blends its narrative arc into the concept in the beginning. I mean, you introduce the villain within the concept introduction. You kind of introduce the struggle with the very nature of the concept introduction that's kind of carried throughout the film with like the hiding of their superhero identities. And I think it just really works pretty well. Like, even though there's a kind of a low point in the action somewhere within the narrative arc, it's pretty seamlessly integrated. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely.
So that's certainly one of this film's biggest like strengths in terms of script. But what is this doing differently than maybe a Frozen in terms of better integrating its narrative?
I think this owes itself to being a more complicated narrative than Frozen, and having more characters who have defined arcs. I mean, Frozen, it was Anna and Elsa, and it was a very straightforward story, and it was a story, for the most part, like, you take away names, genders, what have you, it's a story that we've seen many, many times. This is a more difficult to pin down plot line. I mean, if you look at Frozen, it's the plot line for that, and sort of the relationship it's focusing on is very genre. Like, you know, you look at that and you say, okay, like, I've seen similar movies like that where you've got estranged friends, sisters, siblings, what have you, who are trying to relearn how to be around each other. Incredibles a little bit more difficult to pin down, like what you would, the one word you would give to this sort of narrative framework, because it is, on the one hand, yeah, it's a guy trying to relive his glory days, but that's not the plot line. That just causes everything else that happens after, and you've got like Syndromes trying to get revenge on realizing that his hero was kind of a jerk. You've got the kids in their own sort of realm of narrative arcs trying to come to terms with being kids, and being kids with superpowers and that sort of thing. I think what makes this better than something like Frozen is just that there's so much more going on, and it's so clearly defined, and so I hate using this term because I hate when people say, but it's like, it's meatier, you know, there's less fluff, and there's a lot more strength and structure to these characters and these stories than there is in something like Frozen.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think narratively there's a lot more going on here than Frozen. I think there's a lot better world building here. Like, I don't get a sense with Frozen that their kingdom has any sort of substance to it. And I feel like a lot of the developments, like, I've only seen the movie once. A lot of the people coming over for their big party or whatever, that just seems like, oh, that's tacked on to the established thing that before, and within this world feels very real. However, I actually think Anna and Elsa might be better characters than anyone here. So I don't think it's necessarily like better developed characters, right? We spend
between the two of them, I'd say Anna's the stronger character.
Anna's certainly a stronger character, but like, I don't think there's a character in here who's as well developed as Anna, as in The Incredibles, I mean. Like, I feel like The Incredibles maybe spreads their characters a little thin in that regard.
I'm not sure if it's that so much as that Anna's just got a more interesting characterization.
Do you think it's more interesting in general, or more interesting to me?
Well, in general, I mean, I think it's more interesting to look at what Anna's going through than it is to look at what Bob's going through, because this goes back, I think, to sort of the issue of them being purposefully stereotypical, because you've got this middle-aged guy having a midlife crisis. That's not super interesting or new. But then you've got Anna, a character who's like a very insecure, very well-rounded female character who comes out a much much stronger person at the end. I think that's a lot more interesting to look at than the midlife crisis story.
I also think we just spend like way much more time with Anna than any specific character here.
Yeah. Because Elsa dropped off like the face of the earth.
Yeah, and we kind of have
she's our pull through the movie.
Yeah, we have a strong introduction to Bob, but then there's a solid half hour of the movie where he just doesn't do anything too. So I don't know. I feel like the strength of this movie is not its characterizations as much as it is its narrative composition.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree.
Which is interesting. That makes me think maybe extreme character development isn't always essential.
No, and like I said, genre fiction, genre films, like they can get away with that and still be considered really great stories, because you don't, obviously in the world of entertainment media, you don't need characters who are super pushing the plot. That's why we have this joke, in writing workshops, something's a literary darling, but absolutely no one read it. So it's something, it's super well character developed and the characters pushing the plot, but nobody's heard of it, and it wasn't on the bestseller list, but the New Yorker just loved it so much. So you've got something like this where it's genre, where the characters for the most part very well defined, not super duper special or super duper complicated, but the plot and the narrative arc and adhering to sort of different genre rules works flawlessly. So it is possible. It's a matter, I think, of preference as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're going a little bit, we're going over a few things here, but getting back to Inception, which I brought up, I feel like that's a movie that has an incredible concept. Mm-hmm. But interestingly, the height of the movie is certainly how it integrates that concept into narrative. Just the actual part of the climax of the film with them going through all the layers. I mean, I don't know how well you remember Inception. Okay, but that's a movie that really succeeds there, whereas expositionally it is slower. I'm trying to think of an animated film that's similar to that. I'm not sure I can think of one.
What animated film is like Inception?
Well, yeah, I mean, not specifically, but in terms of better at the climax than at the beginning. That's an interesting one. I'm not sure right
immediately now. Thinks of every single climactic scene of every animated film.
Yeah,
comes up with nothing.
Yeah, no. So maybe it's something about the medium, but that's interesting. Yeah, so we can kind of transition into we're talking about the characterization in this film, and we can get back to some of the other stuff we're talking about if it comes up again. But would you agree with me when I say that none of the characters are particularly strong? I think you said it well when you said that they're well established, but not necessarily. But then there's not necessarily much development beyond that for any of them.
Yeah.
I feel like Mr. Incredible is the main, the biggest character, but he's pretty stereotypical the entire time. He doesn't really grow or anything. I think he's kind of the same. He just finds
because he gets what he wanted at the end.
He just gets what he wanted. Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing is because if you give your character what they Dan Harmon's Story Circle is sort of a offshoot of my favorite, the monomyth, the hero's journey, but it's a more character driven one, and it starts at point one, character wants something, and you go through all the different points, and at the end it ends with point 8, which is character gets what they wanted, and then they have to deal with the consequences. That's not necessarily the end, but that's the point, is that there's no consequences here for Bob for the most part.
Yeah.
He got exactly what he wanted at the end of the movie, so I don't think that served his character well at all, because it didn't force him to change anything.
I don't come out of the movie feeling like Mr. Incredible is a good character. He's fine, but that's not what I think coming out here.
Yeah,
I have more of a sense that maybe Elastigirl's a better character, although how the movie handles her is pretty weird, because she's not anything until the second half of the movie, and then suddenly she is the main character for 30 minutes, right?
Yeah,
it's pretty interesting.
She's very interestingly displayed to the audience.
Even when she's the main character, though, she doesn't really transcend being a mom, right? That's the thing. But that's the thing with all of these characters. They never transcend their stereotypes.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the point, which is what we were talking about in the beginning. They're just designed to be stereotypes.
You could look at it as some sort of form of parody or satire of superhero movies. If he's, as he says, he's doing this on purpose, and he wanted a very clear tone for it, and people are saying, oh, this is like one of the greatest superhero films I've ever made, that might be all part of the point, is that, this is what makes a good superhero movie.
Yeah, I also think I think you can make an argument that a large portion of this film's message is satirical. It's like there's this quote from the Wikipedia article. Some commentators took Bob's frustration with celebrating mediocrity and Syndrome's comments that if everyone is super, then no one is, as a reflection of the views shared by German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, or an extension of Russian-American novelist Ayn Rand's objectivism philosophy, which Bird felt was ridiculous. He stated that a large portion of the audience understood the satire, whereas 2% thought I was doing the Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged.
I'm glad, I was going to say, I'm glad Atlas Shrugged showed up in there. I think it's a really good line, and I think it services Syndrome's syndrome very well. I'm not about to pull out some, Anthem and Ryan Nietzsche crap about it, though.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in order to take away this message, so they cite two things: Bob's frustration with celebrating mediocrity and Syndrome's comment. You have to assume that both of those characters are correct in the views of the film, which I don't think is true. But I think a lot of the viewing audience would be biased to agree with Bob on everything. But actually, credit to Brad Bird, I don't think he's saying that Bob, Mr. Incredible, is right. I don't know if that's the point of the movie. He rewards him at the end in terms of narrative.
Well, the narrative's saying he's right because he gets rewarded. I mean, that's when these things happen if a character... Like, Syndrome got to say that kind of unchecked, and he didn't really get flack for it, so I can see where people are coming in and saying that this is what the movie's trying to say, because Syndrome got to say that, and then nothing happened because of it. Movie's also saying that Bob's correct in everything that he wanted to do and did, because he, again, got what he wanted at the end with no real consequences. So, and that's how you separate when you're trying to figure out, well, is this character saying this, or is this something the author is saying, is when someone does or says something and it goes unchecked and there's no consequences. So I think maybe it's just a slip of not totally punishing Syndrome for that, or not totally having a comeback for that.
I guess, I don't know. I think Syndrome is not the problematic case here, because he's clearly the villain and he gets his comeuppance, It's, I guess the more potentially problematic thing is Bob doesn't go unchecked at all.
Here's my issue, too, is that at the beginning when you meet Buddy for the first time, I think there is a tiny bit of sympathy there to be had, because he kind of gets treated like crap. And and then when you've got a line like this, that is a very slick, well-written line, you are sort of inclined to have some sympathy towards it and agree with it a little bit, I think.
Yeah. I don't think this movie is trying to make many statements.
No, I don't. No, at all. I don't think that that's a statement at all. I always just thought that was a really cool line. What a great villain line.
It is good, and I just don't necessarily think the film is agreeing with anyone specifically. I don't think any of these characters are spotlighted or well developed enough to ultimately be an audience surrogate, or not an audience surrogate, but it sympathized enough with the audience at the end, that were their views were really interesting. I also think there's conflicting things, if you want to focus so much on Bob wanting to display his incredible prowess, then you could also it's that maybe that's a message, but also just being your true self is the message too. Those are two sides of looking at this thing that could be displayed at the end. Yeah, ultimately though, I just don't take away deep meaning from the film. Which is fine. It is really a genre film, and it doesn't need to. I mean, the movie dangles these deeper meanings just enough to not have you think that it's incredibly vapid, but not enough that
which is something Game of Thrones does a lot.
Yeah,
I've noticed.
It does do that, and then not expand upon that at all.
Yeah, but you've got these one-liners, and then
but here it's it all relates enough, and it's more of a cohesive story unit that I think at the end it's that's fine, and then we can think about it a little bit, but really we're just watching the spy movie happen. So yeah. I don't know, comparing The Incredibles to Game of Thrones. I don't know if we need to go into that, but
No.
Let's talk specific characters more. We talked Helen, Elastigirl. Do you think she ultimately comes off as a good character at the end of the film?
Well, that depends on what you want from a good character.
I've seen, the EW ran this list recently. Oh, EW, great content, right? That best female Pixar characters. And Elastigirl, I think, was number 2. And I'm like, I don't think she's a very good character at all. None of these characters I think are great. These are stereotypes that, especially Elastigirl, who doesn't have any sort of focus on her until the plane blows up.
Yeah. No, I agree. I don't think she's a strong character in that she's got a lot going on for her as a person in her own world from what we've seen. I do think she is a good character in terms that she's memorable. And she has it goes back to, great qualities, great attributes, not a lot of choices to make her a character.
Yeah, and I think she's certainly super interesting with her power and the way she's using it, like still maintaining the mom of the family and protecting everyone, but also being like a strong fighter and stuff. It's a very interesting concept model for a character, but I don't think it goes beyond that.
No, it doesn't.
We talked about Mr. Incredible. Do you think he transcends Elastigirl's characterization?
I think he does, only because he's got a lot more choices to make. But again, like we've seen his character 100 times before, so
it is really interesting that he's just right the entire film. He's never wrong, and he never gets punished for, like, ultimately everything he does is correct. Like, from disobeying his company to that seems like the morally correct thing, to going on this island, even if we look down on it for like him abandoning his family. It ultimately is not something the movie portrays as bad, I think.
No, I mean, again, like, there's bits and pieces of places where you're like, oh, but again, like, he doesn't ever really, like, there's that moment at the end where he's like talking to Helen and he's like, I can't lose you, and they have that sort of moment, but beyond that, like, there's nothing really that's saying what he's doing is wrong, or that his intentions are wrong.
Yeah, and then there's the kids, who kind of have, unlike the parents, they actually do change at the end, I would say. They, like, become more comfortable with their true selves, is maybe their arc. Yeah, but both of them, very little, not little to do, but little focus, little time. What do you think of, Dash and Violet?
Again, like, it's very memorable characters. I'm not a fan of the fact that Violet's sort of insecurity is based on the fact that she's, like, got this crush on a guy, and, like, her nice big moment at the end, I mean, after, like, she uses her powers to the shield thing, but it's like she's got that little ending scene where the guy asked her out, and it's like, well, I'm not super happy about that was the reason she was insecure, and that's what the insecurities are focusing on. But I mean, I really like her as a character. Dash, I think, is just a maniac, and I don't think he has anything beyond the fact that he's a maniac. I think of all the characters, he's the weakest, because he's gotten really nothing. I don't think he's got any hurdles that he's going over the way that Violet is. Besides, like, oh, he's mad that he's not allowed to go out for sports, but there's nothing, like, inherently going on in him that requires deeper looks.
The one thing I like with Dash is that he has nice moments with his sister, like, in terms of them getting along. Always look for that. Okay, let's talk Violet. Yeah, so there's two components to Violet's character. It's like the foundation of her character, as Brad Bird explained in that quote, was like her teenage insecurity, and so that manifests in her character and her arc. But it's the way the movie presents that, framing wise, is based off of her inability to talk to the guy she likes, which is just also very stereotypical. And why should we expect this movie to go beyond the stereotypical traits of the family unit, that, because this movie is just inherently stereotypical and heteronormative. But at the end, she's secure and she's taking control of the interaction with the guy, but it's still about the guy. Same thing, I think, with Elastigirl, Helen. She's still the mom and in charge of everything, even though we don't get a scene with her at the end. But she's just maybe more likely to use accepting of her powers and her true self. So this movie starts off at a heteronormative foundation at its core, and then which we view as problematic, the very notion of heteronormativity, people who are socially progressive. So this movie ends at a heteronormative core. It's still a family unit. They still all have the same roles. They end up at the same place. This movie is not trying to subvert heteronormativity. That's not its goal. And this is frustrating because its female characters are put in these very specific situations that is like they're required to be socially acceptable. Helen's still a mom. Violet's still characters driven by crushes on guys. And it's not a feel good moment, really. I think with her and the guy at the end. I think it's feel good enough because she's taking control of the situation. Like I was fine with it enough, but it's frustrating because why is the movie so accepting of heteronormativity? Like I know it's the foundations, but can't we move beyond it at the end? Is like it would make them. It would be more moral. As it is, I think this movie is extremely amoral to me, specifically because it does not attempt to tackle its foundational heteronormativity.
Yeah. And I think one quick way to do that would have been to just omit that scene at the end with Violet and that kid. I mean, obviously, I would say get rid of the plot line completely where she's, like, nervous about talking to this guy, but...
I think you might need Helen, like, doing something not involving her kids
the
at
Bechdel
the
test?
No, well, the movie does pass the Bechdel test because she talks to Violet, but it's which is not in a lot of passes of the Bechdel test or bullcrap. That scene was not bullcrap, like her talking about it. It's a really good scene and stuff. Yeah. But I feel like the heteronormativity is so ingrained as Helen is a mom that at the end you need a scene of her not being a mom in order to like move beyond it. I don't know if the problem can solely be solved by like having Violet not, because we also need to demonstrate Violet's new development in some other way. Yeah. I don't know. It's the movie's. I think the movie's frustratingly amoral, but at the same time, based on its amoralness, and by amoral I mean morality inherently in its definition, not a factor. Not that it is advocating bad things, right? It's just that morals are not considered in this movie's plotline, is what I would argue. Obviously, superheroes are like these very moral characters, but from a social progression standpoint, watching this movie, it just seems very amoral with the heteronormativity at the end. And watching it amorally, I think, kind of allows you to like take off the goggles, kind of the real person goggles. These are not something that are bad or are not inherent. These are just what you should wear in your default life, these goggles. But you can the movie very early kind of tells us, don't watch with these goggles, just accept it as like an exciting, just kind of almost brainless film. That's the thing. I feel like it ends up being more brainless than some other, like, I feel this film is more brainless than WALL-E or Ratatouille.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I don't know. What's your reaction to?
I mean, I think I agree. I mean, I think the movie is purposely not trying to do anything on that front. However, I also don't think that's an excuse, because I feel like something like this, getting rid of those like heteronormative stuff, but still being exactly what it is, would be great for progression, because you see this really amazing superhero movie that follows all sorts of like genre things and is for the most part quote unquote normal, having these progressive stories in it and these more inclusive characters and plot lines would have been awesome. That being said, it was 2004 and they were going full on for every single possible stereotype they could nab from a spy / superhero movie.
Is there an argument that you eliminate the realism of this film if you go outside of this heteronormative bubble? Like
I mean, that's the basis, I think, for all sorts of arguments that people make about, like, why aren't certain people included in this movie and that sort of thing, because people, like to say, okay, the genre specific, this is heteronormative as a cultural history, so therefore we have to portray that in this stereotypical movie about superheroes, or people claim historical accuracy for films when they don't include people of varying cultures and continue to be heteronormative. So on the one hand, like, there is an argument, I guess, for that, but at the same time, I think suggesting that the norm, like, by not doing that and saying, oh, well, we want, we'd sacrifice genre or sacrifice tone or normativity, by doing this is kind of unhelpful to to these groups and to getting this out there, because I think, again, it goes back to what I was saying in the Ratatouille podcast, where we're trained to see narratives a certain way. We're trained to look and see, guy, girl, the guy is the hero, the woman is sort of, as Helen's used in this, like the bargaining chip, or the thing that he's saying he doesn't want to lose, and that sort of thing. Like, it's something to be dangled kind of dangerously, and all this other stuff that happens in this movie. It's all part of a narrative that we've been taught to crave. Like, we've been taught to crave male-centric stories over female. So the thing to do is to insert into these things non-traditional, I'm not going to say like normal or common, but just non-traditional stories. You didn't have to have it be a super 1950s nuclear family. It could have still been like a nuclear family, but it could have been, any number of different combinations of parents or kids or what have you. And that's how you start to break away from teaching people over and over again that these are the stories they want to see.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, obviously, but continuing to play devil's advocate here, it kind of brainlessly doing so. This movie, I don't think, is clearly not trying to be moral. That's kind of my argument. It's not my thought process here. Is like, so I'm trying to get in the head of Brad Bird writing this. So I don't care about morality. I just want to make a resonant film. So I think making this the stereotypical nuclear family would resonate with more people, and especially given that this is inherently an absurd concept. People just having these superpowers, even the kids genetically passing on superpowers. I mean, it's all just kind of absurd. And so we want to ground this film in reality as much as possible in order for it to be acceptable. And to do that, we're just going to have these self-insert nuclear family characters who don't go beyond their stereotypes, but the fact that they're stereotypes and relatable really brings the whole entire film together and makes it like one of the most real movies that Pixar has done, even if it's an incredibly absurd concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's, I guess, sort of not going beyond the suspension of disbelief when you've got something like this. At the same time, I would push back and say there's nothing. I mean, obviously, in the public consciousness, yes, like seeing anything but stereotypical nuclear family in this would have been a put-off, unfortunately. But at the same time, I don't see anything, to me at this point, like in my life and sort of looking at other people in society, I don't see anything different between stereotypical putting in a family that's not this sort of stereotypical 1950s family. Like, to me, that wouldn't have, and that's just because it's me, and like maybe I've trained myself to look at it this way, but to me that would not have hurt me accepting this concept.
Let's say you're going to write a film for Disney, this big budget film.
Oh man.
It's expected to be very successful with a lot of types of people and resonate very much. How do you kind of balance your desire for social progression and morality in a film with the desire to write a film that will be very far-reaching and successful? I
mean, say it's this film, you take out Violet's subplot with this guy. Like, let her be insecure, but don't let it be about a guy. Give Helen something to do that isn't homemaking. Give sort of, maybe even make your main villain female instead of, having this sort of like stereotypical cackling guy, super villain, mad scientist type deal. I mean, there are ways to do it within the framework of this movie that wouldn't have put off from the tone and everything else. I think it was just going for super duper stereotypes. Again, like you said, mindlessly doing what it was doing. I think a little bit more self awareness would have led to a slightly more progressive film. And to say that things like not giving a teenage girl her focus in the movie, a guy, is progressive is kind of sucky. That we have to call it that and not just call it a story. But
so you think you can achieve some semblance of social progression within this movie and still have its base heteronormative concept? Because that's the tricky thing with this film. It's based in a lack of social progression.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely possible. It's like I said, like there's things I could go through everything and say like this is what you could rework, but the big things are Violet's story, giving Helen something to do that's not revolving around wondering about Bob and wondering about the kids and being a stay-at-home mom or a homemaker or what have you. I think Edna Mode was a great character for that.
Voiced by Brad Bird.
Voiced by Brad Bird.
Just absurd.
Well, the story behind that is the person they wanted, he came in and he did, like, he was like, all right, this is what I want it to sound like, and like did it, and she was like, you already do it perfectly, so you should just do it. So he did. But yeah, I mean, I think there's ways to work around this heteronormative narrative framework to make it less stereotypical.
Yeah, I want to go 3 different directions here. Even Frozone, super heteronormative in that he's like the black best friend, right? Mm-hmm. This movie is racially, gender, sexuality, everything is heteronormative about this.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Like everything is just so stereotypical American perceived culture, even though it's not culture anymore. And it's so like, is there like a defense of this? Could you say this film, Brad Bird is making a comment on American heteronormativism with this film?
You could. I don't know if you'd have that strong of an argument though. Because I don't think he is. I think this is just he was using these stereotypes to his advantage when writing the script. And I don't think like it's a satire or anything, and him trying to point out and like if there's one moment that maybe we're supposed to laugh at, it's the scene where Frozone's trying to get like his super suit. Like everyone knows that scene, but I don't think even that is really asking you to laugh so much at the domesticity of it and that sort of thing. I think it's like laughing at the exchange and maybe even making a negative comment about like a nagging wife.
That scene is very upholds a lot of racial stereotypes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think it's commenting on it though. I think it's just doing it.
Yeah,
which is problematic. Which is why like Tumblr's very obsessed with that scene and that line, and it's just that always just leaves a bad feeling in me because that scene's not great. Like
no,
especially you would think Tumblr would realize this, but yeah, it's I don't know. But at the same time, that is a character of color in this film, which is like at least there's that, right? I guess. Even if he's mostly a stereotype.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you balance it. That's the thing with this entire film, right? It's like, how do you balance? I mean, I don't really know. Because the concept itself, I've just going on this again, is the stereotypical family. But you can also do that and have the family be black or have it be like 2 moms. And you can still, I think, achieve the same thing. If it's just not everyone and it's like, okay, well, not every the typical non-social progression pushback is not every film should have diversity in it. In fact, it should represent the demographics of America, and America's majority white and stuff. But like the thing is that this film, every single part of it is the stereotype, and it's not. If you want to talk to statistically, it's not likely that everything, if you're representing an average American, whatever, it's not likely that all of this will uphold the stereotypes. So it's specifically being heteronormative in the face of probabilities, even. I don't know.
Yeah.
we're even talking about before with I don't remember what I was saying, but yeah, during that discussion, I was obviously not saying things I believed in certain times, but yeah, it's hard for I think it's hard for us to have this type of discussion because we're on the same page on it. Like there's no that's what I'm trying to counteract a little bit, but maybe not too successfully. Getting back to characters, I mean, I used that to talk about Frozen, so that was good. Edna's a stereotype in herself, obviously. What narrative elements from this film stand out to you? Because we're kind of criticizing this film in every way except the narrative, which is obviously huge. Like that's the most important thing. So it's also I should say production wise, just almost everything is kind of flawless here. Like we talked about how WALL-E, like the animation hasn't even gotten better than WALL-E. Like I also think here, this film could come out now and it'd be I would totally buy that in almost every single way. Like the only thing is that they don't use cell phones prolifically. Like then that's a common thing with older stories. Like I would just believe that this movie would be now. Yeah. It's just so modern. And I don't always think that about older films. And in fact, older films 2004, but it is at this point older. It's over 10 years old. A lot of times they don't resonate with me as much, not necessarily because they're an inferior quality, although I actually would argue that films are better on average today now than before, which not everyone agrees with. But not because of quality-wise, but just because of like me relating to them. Like a lot of times older films, I struggle with getting into them. Especially we're going towards 90s and 80s, but this one I think is it just all seems very modern and stuff. And I think a lot of credit to the production side of things, the animation, the incredible score. But yeah, narratively, let me get this started with the capes. Like this is a great device that's used and really stands out to me. Like they have this side thing for Edna, which is great on its own and really funny, and then it comes back at the end. Yeah. And it's just really well utilized, I think.
Yeah, so that's called a Chekhov's gun.
Yeah.
Basically what that means is if you've introduced, so Chekhov's gun means if you have a gun on stage in Act 1, you better have fired it by Act 3. So this was a great example of it because it's disguised as sort of a just a little vignette.
The successful Chekhov's guns are ones that we don't immediately recognize as such.
You won't look at it and say. And then the bad ones are ones where you say, well, I need you to like Lost is like, well, I need you to explain that point. You never went back to it. So the best ones are ones where you don't know what you're looking at. So this is disguised as a sort of little just cutaway scene of this guy, or I guess it was a girl, got sucked into. Well, a few different people got like screwed over because they were wearing capes. Comes back at the end, and that's how Syndrome loses. Is he gets sucked in by his cape, and he's wearing a cape the whole time. So maybe it should have been more obvious, like on the first, like. But that's what's so good about it is you see it, and then the rest of the time you're not even thinking about it, and then that happens. So that was a really great narrative element, and it's so clever, and it makes his writing look so clever. Even though how he probably went about it was he knew how the movie was going to end and then went back and made this joke. That's the way a lot of these things work is it's top-down writing is your ending and then you go back and say, well, how can I make this as mixed up as possible to sort of throw the audience. I also think Syndrome functioning as a villain works really, really well with Buddy at the beginning. Like, you get the feeling when you meet Buddy at the beginning that obviously he's coming back, but I think just the way they worked it out, because you don't see him until like halfway through the movie. Like, he fights off a bunch of these giant robots like a few times before we finally learn that it's, that we see the face of the person controlling them. And I think at that point you've forgotten about this kid at the beginning, even if he had a sort of like ominous note when he walked out. So I think Syndrome really, and the way that they sort of like hid his story and then layered it back in, worked really, really well.
Yeah. That's one of those strengths of it. I forgot when rewatching it that there's like an entire thing in between him getting to the island for the first time and then the Syndrome stuff. But there's like this whole like vignettes of him coming back and forth and fighting the robots. I think the robot itself is another thing that the movie does really well, portraying a learning robot and the subsequent plot reveals of how the superheroes were fighting these earlier versions of the robot. Narratively, I think that was really well done, and even the action sequences of him fighting the robot is always it was always exciting and engaging, I think.
Yeah.
Bob learning about the whole sequence of him getting past the lava door and him learning all the secrets from the computer is kind of flawlessly executed, I think. The entire pacing and like the franticness of him looking at the computer, that just really stood out to me.
Yeah.
Like, what else? Like, there's just we talked about the beginning sequence, but the entire thing of him going to the movie and him going to, I don't know, the wedding, and him interacting with Helen before that, and then the reveal at the end of the beginning sequence, that's just incredible, I think. Just the franticness in the beginning of him taking on all these different things, and then they come back, all these like different superhero tasks, and then they come back with the reveal that the lawsuits are coming. Just very well handled. I mean, like I feel like I want to like list a lot of these because we talked a lot of negative aspects about it, but I think overall my impression of this was incredibly positive, this film, all said and done. Everything with Edna, she was a great character. How them showing, they showed the suits in action, the kids. What do you think of Violet's kind of arc with her force field?
I think it was, I mean, for the most part, I liked it. I liked sort of the moments where it was a huge stressor, like in the plane when Helen was yelling at her and she couldn't do it, and sort of working on it and eventually getting it to work as sort of like the climactic moment at the end. It was all very good because I think it balanced well action with emotion, because I just think that scene in the plane of them screaming at each other is very, very good and very, very real. So I don't have too many complaints about that, if any.
Yeah, I think it was fine. Initially it bothered me that she couldn't use her powers effectively while Dash could, but it went on an arc where like she actually had an arc whereas Dash didn't, so I think it was fine. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, she's the most interesting character, I guess, to me, because you could argue that she's narratively one of the most interesting characters because she actually grows and has faults in the film, unlike maybe everyone else. Other aspects of the film. This film just is so good at portraying like suspense and like high pace. I don't know how to like franticness, high pace, fast action. Yeah. There's just always this great sense of this film really handles everything tonally really well. Just the tone is always very well established and very interesting, except for I think the one thing where they're all separated on the island. But then even it comes together pretty quickly. Right? Like I was bored like at one point, and then it came back very fast. So even that I think was fine. What else can you think of? Good elements of the film. One thing. I like how the rocket launches into the city, and it just does it, and it's kind of the side action, right? Like there's no big focus on this the main plot of the film, like him launching the robot to destroy the city, and then it's also like a tiered reveal in terms of Syndrome's plan of him trying to be the hero. Like I feel like his motivations were a little off, but then his ultimate plan of him wanting to be the hero at the end, they really came together well for his character.
Yeah, and that's another thing why I think his story arc is what makes this film so good, and the way they went about revealing his character.
Yeah, that's he could be the strongest part of the film. It's possible. What else? I like how the film ends, like the entire ending, the sequence of them all working together to ultimately kill the robot, and I like that the robot learns Syndrome. Like I think like that's very logical. Like Syndrome might not anticipate the robot ever being being able to defeat him once the plan ultimately comes together, but ultimately the robot realizes what he's doing. And like gets away the control stick. Like I feel like that's a very good portrayal of learning technology, like computer technology.
Yeah.
So I don't know, just so seriously, like almost everything this film does is incredible, I think.
Yeah.
All narrative aspects. What else? the babysitter. What did Dash the what's his name? The baby.
Jack.
Jack. Well, how do you think Jack his superpower reveal?
I think it's funny because I think Tumblr's very obsessed with that as well. They like it comes up a lot on Tumblr. They're like the biggest plot twist ever, which it was, but it wasn't. Like it was.
It was really hinting at this the entire time.
Yeah, it was, and especially when you've got at the end when you get all those like random little because they talk like 8 times. Like, well, what about the baby? And it's like, oh, the baby doesn't have superpowers.
Yeah.
Like it's said so much in your face that you're like, okay. But I think the way that it happened at the end was very funny when she gets all the phone calls, and then when Syndrome steals the baby, and it just like goes berserk with like 8 different like powers because it just hasn't settled yet. So I think it was done very well. I don't think it's as big of a thing as people make it out to be, though. It
was fine. Yeah, you can see it coming if you like pay attention for it because they do mention a lot. Syndrome at the end with the baby. There's 2 aspects of brilliance to this. One is again tone wise how they handled it. It's just great. Like, I don't know how to explain it more than that, but it just feels great.
Yeah.
And the second thing is you forget about him because the main fight at the end is with the robot, and Syndrome's like not a factor. So him coming back at the end is like surprising and really good.
Yeah, that's a step in the return cycle in the hero's journey. Is I forget what it's like the race or something during the refusal of return where you have one last hurdle you have to jump before you get to officially win.
Yeah.
Be that.
Yeah. I mean,
it's often not used actually. A lot of people ignore that in terms of writing. They finish a lot cleaner than that, and this didn't. So there you go.
Normally I get annoyed at the constant bringing up of the hero's journey, but like this film is an obvious hero's journey. It's an obvious hero's journey for Bob.
Well, literally everything.
Like he gets the call, and it's like
everything is a hero's journey.
It is, but
some things are more obvious.
This movie, it's pretty obvious, I'd say. Also, now that I'm thinking about it, he gets the call from like an iPad.
Yeah,
but this movie's in 2004.
Well, they were also like owned by Apple, maybe.
Oh,
maybe they were hinting us.
Apple was put there earlier.
Or not owned, but like they basically.
I guess tablets existed, kind of. I don't know. Like
I think the idea of tablets existed.
Yeah, I guess the idea of it. Okay. And we talked about her character already too. And the scenes of her like tailing him and Frozone were really good. And it's like you think she's going to be malicious, and then it's like she's not malicious, and then she is malicious. Like that entire thing.
Yeah.
Them saving the people from the building and then ending up in the bank. It's like, I don't know. It's just that was very exciting too. I don't know. Seriously, just everything's good, kind of, except on a theoretical level.
Yeah.
Maybe not a theoretical level, but on a higher level. Any other specifics or generalities involving the Incredibles you want to get into?
No, I think we got it.
Yeah, kind of went on a hightailed it at the end to cover all the elements because we spent so long talking about unrelated things. But yes. I specifically brought them up, so that's my fault. Okay, overall, Incredibles. So this is our 4th Pixar film we're talking about. Yeah. So where does the Incredibles rank among the 4 you've seen recently, and overall? Because you've seen the other ones, obviously, and we'll get a more detailed list as we keep going. But just overall, generally, where do you think it is?
This is, for the longest time, and it probably still is my favorite Pixar film. I'm still trying to figure out where Inside Out's falling. I need to see it again. But yeah, no, this is like my top Pixar film was The Incredibles, which is why every year when they announced another Cars movie, I was like, but where's Incredibles 2? Possibly, maybe happening, who knows?
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, but yeah, no, this is my top Pixar film.
What about all films of all time? Up there?
Yeah, it's definitely up there.
Yeah. So I've had this Pixar list. Probably made it like 4 years ago or something. I had Incredibles as number 5 behind WALL-E, Ratatouille, Monsters, Inc. and Up. I was pretty blown away with this viewing. I have I used to be annoyed by people who called The Incredibles their favorite Pixar film because that kind of grew into a consensus among everyone, and it annoyed me because it's like, I resonate so much with WALL-E and Ratatouille's message, and Monsters Inc. has a lot of personal meaning for me. Like that was like my childhood film, and just seeing The Incredibles get all the hype is a little bit annoying. But now, like, upon rewatch, The Incredibles is probably the best film that Pixar has made, and one of the best films I've seen of all time.
Yeah.
I would say that. Personally, in terms of favorites and in terms of my rankings, it's going to be still below WALL-E and Ratatouille, but I would move it up to the 3 slot right now. So that's what I'm going to do. Move it from 5 to 3. But this is just much more of a flawless film than WALL-E. But the difference for me is, like, I emotionally resonate with WALL-E so much. It just has a lot of meaning I gain from it. But this film, I don't emotionally resonate with it at all, right? So it's like incredible filmmaking, but no emotional resonance, as opposed to WALL-E. But WALL-E, I think, also has great filmmaking and has emotional resonance, so that would be my top one. And that's the argument, I guess.
Nice.
Okay, let's talk Incredibles 2 for a second. It is happening. It's currently in production. They revealed in a few months ago. It's his next film after Tomorrowland. He's making it now. But you saw Tomorrowland. Did you see Tomorrowland?
I did see Tomorrowland.
I have not seen it.
Saw it at work.
Did you like it?
No
spoilers, but you didn't particularly like it, because
no.
I feel like you could argue that that's Brad Bird's first bad film. I mean, I haven't seen it, but that seems to be because, like, he has not made many films. Iron Giant. We'll go over that at some point on the podcast. I haven't seen it in too long to comment on it. Incredibles, Ratatouille. Then he directed Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol, which is actually a really good film. Like, I saw it; it's really good, and Tomorrowland, so you could argue that's his first bad one. It's interesting. Him transitioning from animation to live action, frustrating as an animation fan. We need Brad Bird directing animated films. He's too good.
Yeah.
Same with Andrew Stanton, and they're both back, so that's good.
Yeah.
He is making Incredibles 2 right now. He says he kind of claims that he didn't want to do it until he had a good enough idea for the sequel. Everyone, the thing with the common refrain you hear from people with involving sequels, especially for Pixar, who's getting into a sequel thing now, is that I don't want a forced sequel for a film. If they actually have a good idea for it, then they can do it. But I don't want a forced sequel. So Brad Bird's trying to say, I have a good idea for it. I mean, the proof would be it's 11 years later, right?
Yeah.
So I've waited it, and I have the idea, and let's go with it. So are you excited at the prospect of an Incredibles sequel?
I am, yeah, because I think it's one of the Pixar films that was kind of built for a sequel as well, because
people always say that too.
Yeah, like it's the one that was really like.
Why is it built for a sequel?
I think just because of the world it inhabits and the fact that these characters didn't go through super amounts of changes, like we were saying, so therefore it doesn't feel like a complete, like, you look at Frozen, the fact that Frozen's getting a sequel, you're like, why? Because they went through their narrative arc, and they went through their emotional arc, and they ended up at a different place than they were at the beginning, or back to where they were trying to get to from the beginning. Incredibles doesn't have that narrative arc, so I think it leaves itself open to playing around more with these characters, and it's got a huge mythology of the world that you can also just sort of inhabit.
So I think Incredibles is not setting up for a sequel. Like, I feel like that's clear. Like, there's no sequel hook at the end. Like, the thing I think a lot of people might misinterpret the John Ratzenberger character at the end. I don't remember his name, but
the Underminer
as that being like a sequel hook. But it's like a and the world continues for the characters. You know, this is the new world of these people. So I don't think there's a sequel hook, but I feel like the fact that we see their lives after and their action continuing, and there's still excitement in their lives afterwards, and it's this new version of their world, that's sequel friendly. Like, there's more stories to be told involving them.
Yeah.
I'm not the thing is that these characters aren't great. So I'm excited for Brad Bird getting to this genre again, right? And I'm excited for Brad Bird doing another animated film, but I don't want the same concept, right? Like, I want them, I mean, obviously I'm about to say this, I want them to, like, focus in on Violet and have a Violet film. Obviously that's what I'm saying, but something like that. Like, it could be Dash. I would not like that as much as a Violet film, especially because he's less interesting in the movie, but you want it to be not about the family unit anymore, I guess, because then it's just the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
If it's just like this movie ends up with all of them all fighting together, and that's the big payoff, and it works as a payoff. I don't know if it works as much as a concept. So, like, I'm not sure what story direction you go in here, but something maybe you have a new character. It seems like they're going to be this returning characters because Sam Jackson says he's coming back as Frozone. So
Yeah.
it seems like we're going to be. I mean, a Frozone movie could be cool, but I'm not thrilled with another movie focused on Mr. Incredible.
Which is hopefully why maybe it focuses on Dash and Violet.
That'd be pretty. Yeah, a sibling movie would be cool too.
Yeah.
I would like that.
Frozen. Incredibles 2. Frozen.
Yeah, the Frozen already did that, I guess, kind of. But Frozen has its own kind of stuff going on. Yeah, it's just in general exciting for Brad Bird to direct another superhero spy movie. That would just be incredibly exciting. So incredibly Get it?
Yes.
Do you get it? Because
I was waiting for you to make that joke the entire movie.
I held off until at the very end.
The entire movie. Oh my god, the entire podcast.
The entire podcast. Yeah. Yeah. So overall, I was just kind of blown away by Incredibles again. I am almost never just like have no complaints about a narrative. That it's just so rare, and I kind of have just no complaints about this narrative. Our complaints about this movie are like foundational.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have a problem with you calling this flawless storytelling.
Me personally calling it flawless.
Someone.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, foundational problems aside, I think from what it was started out with and what it gave itself, I think it worked beautifully, and I have zero complaints about the way the story went. So.
And you know what's so interesting is that Ratatouille is his next film, and Ratatouille kind of has narrative problems, but it ends up in such a magical place. Mm-hmm. Like, it's kind of different here. So Brad Bird's kind of capable of achieving resonance in different ways, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And not even counting Iron Giant, which... I don't know. I don't remember enough. It's
coming back to theaters.
The thing with Iron Giant is
for a hot second.
I have like a really negative perception of it in my head because Cartoon Network did these Iron Giant days. I got so sick of watching that film that like as a kid, and I just don't remember anything about it anymore. But
now you can go see it in theaters again.
Well, I doubt I'm going to do that, but we'll watch it for this, and I'll probably love it because it's supposed to be very good.
It's a very good movie. Yeah. It's a very sad movie.
Yeah, kind of the opposite of this. Yeah. Sigh. Okay. I think that about wraps it up. Anything else?
No, I'm good.
Yeah, I think okay. We've achieved our longest podcast. I think.
On the one that Dylan said going in, I'm gonna have nothing to say about this movie.
Well, yeah. There's more. We talked about more different things than I thought, and I'm not like as satisfied with how I got into how I tackled the main thing with how we see this movie in terms of the heteronormativity versus what actually comes out. Like, I'm not sure if we reached any as many interesting conclusions as we did with Ratatouille. You know, mm-hmm. I don't know. Maybe it's a harder topic. I don't know. Let me know what you thought of this, guys. Overlyanimated.com. You can let me know on Dylan OVA on Tumblr and Dylan_OVA on Twitter. Mel, where can we find you?
At Mel Moyer on Twitter, themelmoy.tumblr.com.
I still have the...
Dylan's still hoarding that. I actually think I stole it for myself, now that I think about it. I'm pretty sure my first Tumblr was melmoy.tumblr.com.
Why can't you get it back then?
Because I don't remember any of the logins for it, so it's just sitting in the ether right now.
Like you don't even remember your email?
Yeah, so okay. I can't go in and shut it down and take it back. So
interesting. This is quite the problem. You can support us on patreon.com/overlyanimated. Big thank you to our current patrons, and we're recording this a week before it's going to air, so that's the thing with all the patron lists. Like, for non-episode discussions, we'll record it earlier. Thanks to our current patrons, Shayna, Mitch, Cordell, Beatrice, and Nate. So we got Hey Ya Fever, Mitch, Cordell University, Beatrix Lestrange. Mel, you can choose which Nate nickname to go with. We're still undecided.
Can we do Nathan Fillion?
I did that on the last one, so sure.
All right, Nathan Fillion. You're Nathan Fillion.
Okay, until Sam
gets really mad
to change it. Yeah, she will. I think that's about it. Which Pixar film should we do next? What was that?
That was me thinking. Oh. I'm trying to think of ones that would have interesting things to talk about.
We did Incredibles now because someone on Twitter wanted us to talk about that. Someone on Tumblr has said after hearing that I'm not the biggest fan of Toy Story, that would be an interesting one to hear about, my complaints about Toy Story. What, for the record, where are you on Toy Story? Is that like a classic for you and you love it?
Yeah, I mean,
because that would be the really interesting thing going into that podcast, like me being like really down on it and you being really high on it. That would make for the better concept.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think if I have an emotional attachment. I was one of the few people who didn't really care about the third one.
Yeah, okay, so we're not going to have, so it's not ideal. Like, ideally, it would be me destroying this film while we have someone who's, like, really emotionally attached to it.
Yeah, no, I'm not emotionally attached to Toy Story.
I feel like our age bracket is slightly younger than those emotionally attached to Toy Story. Like we talked about this earlier. And for me, the big childhood movie is Monsters, Inc. And Incredibles is around here, too.
We could talk about A Bug's Life.
Yeah, we'll do A Bug's Life. That's I don't know if we'll get too much discussion. That's like a good but not great movie, you know? It's fine. It's A Bug's Life fine.
Talk about its evil twin, Ants.
Ants? No, I don't think we're going to do an Ants podcast. When we do Brave, eventually, that's going to be an interesting one.
It's just my boo. Fun fact, in Jurassic World, Brad Bird was the voice of the monorail announcer.
I have not seen that yet.
Yeah.
That is quite a fun fact.
Yeah.
Wow, good job.
Thanks.
Fun fact, yeah. Okay. That's it. Thanks, guys, for listening. I don't know what's next on the schedule after this, but a question mark. Okay, so to be determined. We'll see you next time. Overlyanimated.com for everything. Bye.
Adios.